our topic of today, which is New York, the New Yorkers, the New York Filipino American community. So, without further ado, I must introduce our guest, and here he is. I'm going to unpin him. I'm going to unpin me. I got to unpin me so that we're a duo. He is he's really the New York Filipino community as far as FANHS is concerned. His name, Joey Tabaco. Hi, Joey.
How's it going, Emil?
And so, Joey, you're you're kind of like one of the stalwarts for the Filipino American National Historical Society of New York. Of course, the president or the vice president of the entire organization, Kevin Nadal, he's out in New York now, although he is a Californian. Uh, you are kind of like have long been a chapter leader. Tell me about the Filipino Americans in New York City. When were the first Filipinos in New York?
Well, the first recorded Filipino in New York that's documented is Jose Rizal back in 1888. And
18
so
Rizal, the father of he's the great Philippine hero. So 1880, what brought him to New York?
well, he was traveling around. Uh, New York was one of his stops. I think he came from London to New York and then went to Philadelphia after that. He didn't like his stay here, but you know, that back in the late 1800s, New
Yeah.
York wasn't a very nice place.
Yeah, and right at that time, the Philippines was sort of well, it was the subject of the Spanish American War within a few short years of that, and then the Philippine American War. And when you say Jose Rizal to a Filipino, Dr. Jose Rizal, he is sort of like the founding father or he's a national hero. Everyone say and the most patriotic of national heroes. I mean, there are others, but when if you mention Emilio Aguinaldo, you got to mention Rizal. What, what was his impression of New York? How long did he stay?
I think he was only here for maybe a few weeks,
Yeah,
but and even the hotel that he stayed in no longer exists. They tore it down and built something else in the place.
yeah.
Uh, but he I think he drew a picture of the Brooklyn Bridge, from what I understand, was one of his activities, and he was just traveling around and seeing what it was like. And you know, back then, like I said, New York wasn't a very nice place, and if you were a brown person, it was even less nice.
Did he say
So
disparaging things about New York?
I don't know exactly what he said. I in general, what I understand from what um, uh, the writings that I've seen from mainly from Fonz, uh, he said he wasn't very impressed by New York, like he was by the European cities like London and Paris and those
Uh,
places that he went to.
and and all right, so if Rizal is the first recorded Filipino there, uh, I guess we could surmise that. Well, if you were traveling at all, you were of a class of Filipino. You were Ilustrado. You were
Yes.
yeah, you were from the elites who were able to see the world. And were there very many others, or was it really just a very special elite class that?
Well, I'm sure there have been Filipino sailors here, but that nothing's really been documented about them. Uh, you know, especially in the 19, I guess, teens and 20s,
Yeah,
when,
I've
when
heard
they
about.
started getting Filipino stewards on the Navy ships, and there was actually a small community by the Brooklyn Navy Yard that had Filipinos there. That actually there was a restaurant back then that was built nearby the Navy Yard there in Brooklyn that actually advertised in a national Philippine newspaper
Yeah.
that to visit them if you were in New York City and you were a Filipino.
How long or when was that established? I mean, when you say the Navy, are you talking about around World War II or maybe closer?
It was actually the Filipino stewards started being enlisted in the Navy
Right.
in World War One.
Oh, wow. So
So
World War
so
One. So you're talking about 1914, 1912, 1916, around there?
yes, but the actual first Filipinos that came to New York were again the upper class pensionados back in the early 1900s. I think around 1903 is when the first one showed up here in New York. And they were going to places like NYU and Columbia and Fordham, which is Catholic University,
Right.
that were the big universities here, and being educated to be sent back to the Philippines to be the administrators for the American government. Many of them didn't go back, they stayed here.
Right.
And
So, I mean, yeah, but they were, I guess, if they came late enough, like after the Philippine American War, they were able to stay as American nationals, right?
well, yes, even my own father, since he came here before July 4th in 1946, he came here like in March or April of 1946. He has no immigration papers. My mother, who came a year later in 1947, actually has actual immigration papers that coming into the country. But in our family's search to try and find any immigration papers on my father, there were none because he back then he was still considered to be an American citizen, even though he was coming here to work in the United Nations as a Filipino.
Right.
So
But he was considered an American national.
because the Philippines hadn't been granted independence yet.
Right. So that and I noticed one of your pictures that you've sent me, and we'll share it maybe later. It's not as important to share now, perhaps, but you show the United Nations. That's why your father came here, and
That
it,
yes,
and the United Nations was a kind of and continues to be a kind of magnet for Filipinos to come to the New York area.
yes, a lot of Filipinos through the years have worked at the United Nations, and some of them have stayed here since. Once you start growing a family here, like my father did, when he retired in, I believe it was around 1978, and he told my mother, well, we're going to go back home to the Philippines, even though he had been living in the house that he bought here since 1953. He still referred to the Philippines as home.
Yeah.
um, my mother said, bye, I'm staying here with the kids. And we were all Americanized because
Yeah.
back then, before 65,
Yeah.
if you didn't acclimate to being a New York, specifically New Yorker, not just an American,
Yeah.
uh, you know, you weren't going to make it here. And we were all 10 of us kids were all New Yorkers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even my mother became a New Yorker.
Wow. And did she start picking up a different kind of Filipino accent, a Filipino New York accent?
Well, well, my mother never really spoke Tagalog as the native language. She was Visayan
Right.
from Bohol. So she spoke, uh, I guess you could call it Boholano dialect, which was
Or,
slightly different than Cebuano or Visayan.
right.
Um, she came from the barrios of Tagbilaran, the barangays, I guess, of Tagbilaran. So it was uh, difficult for her to fit in with the Filipino society here in New York, since at the time most of the people in the UN were from the upper class. My father got the job here because he applied on his own. He had been drafted into the army because he could read and write English, and somewhat speak it, and he could type. So the army drafted him, and because he knew officers in the American Army, he got recommendations from them. And so when he sent an application into the UN directly uh, to get a job here, he got the job without the express written consent, especially of Carlos P. Romulo, who happened to be the UN ambassador.
Right.
And Romulo was rather upset that he got the job without his,
Really? Really?
approval.
Did your father work and meet Romula?
He was called on the carpet to the Philippine consulate and the mission, the Philippine mission to the UN. to explain to Romulo how did he get here.
And he
You
said, "Look, I know how to touch type.
know.
I have a skill." Well,
Yes.
that's something because Romulo is he's another one of those Filipino heroes that
Yes.
you don't really hear about enough now because he was a patrician, really, but he was I don't want to say that because there was something basic about him, which surprises me about your story because Romulo has always been seen to me not as this elitist, but a man of, a man who could recognize the good in everyone. He wasn't, but he had that touch of elitism too. And I suppose,
Yes. But he later on became friends with my father
yeah. What was that like?
since he knew he couldn't throw him out because the UN had hired him and not the Philippine government. So
See, that's a unique story,
yes, it is.
as people, I mean, because I grew up in San Francisco, and even the UN has its sort of start at in the Civic Center of San Francisco, the what is now the Opera House, and they've named. I think there's an alley named after Romulo, but people who know that how important Carlos Romulo is, but a passing generation kind of relegates him to, oh, who is that Filipino guy? Great orator, a great statesman, and called your father on the carpet. That's the
Like
story.
I said, later on they became friends. But my mother, who, like I said, came from the barrios of Tagbilaran, was in a different class of society, and the Filipinos back then were very, class conscious.
Right. Well,
So my
still,
parents didn't get invited to a lot of the diplomatic functions,
that's
that
all right. You
parties
your
that
own,
they
make
had.
your own lumpia. You can make it and pass around the San Miguel with your the
So
Pulatan.
it was, we never really knew any Filipinos growing up. My
Really?
father also, because he was a army veteran, got his VA and bought a house under the VA. Uh, by 1953, he had enough money to put down and buy the house there in New York City, right near Lake Success, where the UN was, the headquarters of the UN was at the time.
And I hope he still owns that, or your family still owns that house.
My sister owns that house now.
Well, she's a
Who
lucky.
she's actually listening to the broadcast right
Oh,
now.
great. Well, you're a lucky gal, sister, and I'm going to show your picture for I think 12, the one with the big fancy hairdo.
So,
But
so no,
but
that's my eldest sister Joanne. She lives in Pennsylvania now.
oh, okay.
But
But Joey, this is
Esther was good for showing up at the Filipino beauty pageants that they had here in New York City.
yeah.
So she was a good looker also.
Well, look, Joey, this is something you have. The foundation of the Filipino American community really was set by World War II, and by the story of your family, your father coming here with citizenship, and then joining the UN, and then being in the army. So he had the benefit of the GI Bill, which is really, if you look at it, the most effective form of affirmative action. Of,
Well, he grandfathered into it since he applied before the Recession Act was passed.
yeah, yeah.
So he was already in the VA programs, so they weren't about to throw him out. They just grandfathered him to the program.
And the great thing about that is this: you look at the ways in which the Filipinos became a part of the great American middle class. The Joey Tabaco family story really an example of that. And I say that because people need to understand that how they interact with American society depends upon how you were brought in, the waves of immigration. My father came in 1928. I like to say a lot. He was one of the Monongs who went from Loag, from Ilocos Norte to San Francisco, did not want to go to Stockton, did not want to pick the vegetables. He wanted to cook the vegetables. So he stayed in San Francisco and worked the restaurants. And that's where he met a lot of the Filipinos who were either Navy stewards or in the military. And some of them were able to get like your father, the VA benefit, the GI benefit to so enabled him to buy the house. My father was 4F. So we were renters all along. My father was also too old to join the military. But the fact that my father never went east of Reno and you went straight all across to New York. I mean, there's a lot of people that when they see you, they don't realize you didn't come through Ellis Island. You didn't come through like a lot of, I mean, the Asians didn't come through Ellis Island. They had to get their other way.
There were a few Filipinos that actually did come through Ellis Island.
Yeah.
Most of them came through Angel Island there in San Francisco, but
Right.
there were a few. And one of the things that the FANHS chapter here in New York was trying to do was try and document those who did come through Ellis Island.
What was
We
this?
haven't finished that project yet.
I mean, but in general, how did they get? Were they sailors, or did they find themselves in Europe and then immigrated from Europe to Ellis Island, or what was their journey like?
Um, well, those people that came mostly were, like I say, from the pensionado class.
Mhm.
The either you were politically or your families were one of the rich families, or you were, like I say, politically connected, so that you were of the upper class, the kind of people that kind of hung around together and kind of looked down on people like my parents who were provincials from the barrios.
Right.
So
So, and your mother was from Bohol, and your
she
father,
she directly pretty much came here from Bohol to New York.
and your
She didn't
father.
know any English when she got here,
Wow. And
and she barely could speak Tagalog. Barely.
your father came with through the UN thing,
Yes.
and then how did they meet in New York? That's a good
No,
story.
no. They were married in the
Oh,
Philippines
they're married.
before the war. So
So he brought his bride together to
yes.
the UN. Okay, so but back to the Ellis Island Filipinos. So they were mostly pensionados who had come from Europe, or what? Who went through Ellis Island?
Like I say, that they were of the upper class that managed to probably get here into the United States through Europe,
I see. I see.
because it was you had to be able to come from someplace over the Atlantic to get into Ellis Island.
So
Otherwise, you'd be coming through Angel Island.
now, how about the Filipinos who came the traditional way on the dollar steamship lines from Manila to California and then said, screw this, I'm not going to hang out for the anti miscegenation laws. I'm going east. And you know that there were some went to get married or they met up with other people, that they traveled eastward. How many of those kind of Filipinos did you see end up in New York?
Um,
Many, or do you know of many?
there were very few, unless you were rich enough to be able to get from California to New York. Uh, you know, it
Uh,
was pretty hard for people to come here.
I'm
So
wondering
you,
if there wasn't some like Jack Kerouac Filipino type, who was like hanging out his finger and hitching a ride to New York and found himself somewhere in Chelsea or the Lower East Side or something
yeah,
like
those there were actually some artists and writers that came mainly into like Greenwich Village.
that. Right.
That because that's where the beatniks and whatever they were called back then hung out.
Were there
So
were there Filipino beatniks there?
I forget what they were called back then, but they were what eventually became the hippies in my generation
Oh,
that hung out. I mean, Greenwich Village was a place that we hung out in as teenagers. Because even though I was a greaser, I was not a hippie.
yeah,
It was still a place to go because of the music, for one thing. All of the music was happening there in the village. So
I like that though, Joey. Self described greaser, sort of like the Fonz. I'm the Fonz. Well,
exactly.
you grew up in New York City. I grew up in San Francisco. I was born and raised in San Francisco, uh, and we always, I never wanted San Francisco to become Manhattanized, but it's become Manhattanized. But what was growing up in New York like, Joey? Yeah,
Well,
in the city. Grew up in
The truth is, I grew up in the suburbs. I did not grow up in Manhattan. So when I went into Manhattan, the people that were from Manhattan would spot right away that I had more of a Long Island accent than a Brooklyn or New York accent.
it's certainly
And
not a
and
Queens accent.
and the neighborhood I grew up in was pretty much all white. My family was pretty much the only colored family in the neighborhood.
Now
And
you call them colored. Is that what they? I mean, there were Filipinos
that
the exception.
that was kind of like the joke.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, my father and my mother also claimed that there was some problem when we first moved in there, but uh, it wasn't anything serious. You
Yeah.
know,
I mean,
uh,
but Filipinos were accepted, or did they experience a kind of hardship, or did they, once they figured out that your father was working at the UN because he could touch type, once they realized that, they said, "Oh, he's one of us," or what was that? What was the
my father and mother never socialized. It was us kids that socialized, and we were pretty much brought up as New Yorker kids, and we didn't speak the language, so we had no accent, and that was purposely done by my father, who told my mother, who couldn't speak English, that don't talk to them in the language. So
God?
my mother basically learned English from me as
Yeah.
I was going through school, and that's
Yeah.
how it was. Because back then, if you didn't, but let me say this: the neighborhood I grew up in was in the far eastern side of New York City. It was all white, but if you went from one house to another house, they were speaking every single European language that you could think of.
Yeah.
Okay, so you would go from one house to another, and each of the grandparents and sometimes the parents even spoke whatever the native language was from whatever European country that they came from.
Yeah.
Even though they were all white, basically.
What neighborhood
New
generally?
New Hyde Park was the name of and that was like just south of Lake Success where the UN was.
Yeah.
Um, and that's how we ended up there, because that's where my father was working before they built the actual UN building in Manhattan
Right.
in 19, I guess, 52 is when they started moving from Lake Success into Manhattan.
And so, boy, that's like the far east corner of New York. So you up toward like
It's Nassau County,
Ness,
basically.
yeah, yeah,
And it looked like Nassau County back then, you know.
which means it was green.
Pretty much green. There were actually still truck farms in the neighborhood,
Yeah.
and large open areas. You
As
won't find that today, but back then it was like that.
as a Filipino family, did you do any growing? I mean, that tends to be. Did you?
Most of my father's backyard, if you'd looked at any of the pictures in the album that had been posted by the Queen's Library, um, what happened was that the Queen's Library, in cooperation with Queen's College, uh, had a project going on, and one of the Filipinos got a grant, um, and he named the project "My Barrio, My Borough," kind of thing,
Yeah.
and he posted all of those pictures plus stories, including some oral stuff, in the Queens Public Library archives.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff, got put in there, um, uh, by that Filipino who was working. Uh, Claro KC, I think, was his name that he used for that project.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to
um,
try to show some of that. I mean, the Queen's Library. I mean, it's really something that you're able to get the page and to get the images because it's quite a collection, and anyone can can access it, right? And anyone can go
yes,
and
well, Queens is the most diverse county in the United States. It also happens to be a borough of New York City.
yeah,
So, a lot of those pictures were put there, not just of my family, but several families who have been here uh, since the 1900s.
Joey,
And
I'm trying to share this on the screen. Do you see your family picture there?
There's part of it is in there.
Part of it. Okay, trying to get all of it, but I'm still Zoom challenged a bit. But let me see if I can get us. See now, let me see if I can get a better shot of your picture of your family because at the museum we want to share pictures like this because we want to show people what it was like. We want to show people. No, no, I'm not okay. I can't minimize while I'm sharing. So here's part of the picture. Here's part of the.
Yes, I'm over there in the far right of the picture. Oop,
That's you
there
right there, right?
in the far the well next to my brother Carlos is at the very end there now. There's me. Oop, there's my father
That's
on the
your
far
father.
right.
Yeah.
I was 16 in that picture.
You're
And I'm
6.
71 now.
Oh, look at you. Now look at all, and there's your mom.
There's my mom, my youngest sister.
Yeah, and who's the woman with the? She looks like she has like a kettlebell haircut.
Yes, that's my sister Joanne, the one that lives in Pennsylvania. Uh, she
She's
she pretty much, grew up in that time
yeah.
where that's the way most girls look here. Didn't matter what color you were.
So they weren't. They all looked like they wore a kettlebell on their head.
And
That's good. That's good.
that big bouffant teased hair that they had back then.
I I could tell she probably had a lot of suitors. Yeah.
Actually, if you look in the lower right corner there, my sister Esther,
Yeah.
once she became a teenager, she got in several Miss Philippines type contests there, since she was a good looker. But the way they won the contest was the ones that collected the most money.
Ah,
So,
always patronage. Always,
and
always.
she's the one that actually lives in my parents' house now with her family.
Yeah. Yeah. So now, and there's your mom. Now, so how many brothers and sisters did you have, Joey?
Well, there were 10 of us that survived. There were several before me that died during the war in the Philippines. And then I was pretty much the first one born here in the US that survived. There was one before me, but they
Ten.
also died. Back then, a lot of the kids, died. So,
Ten that
my
survived.
mother was pregnant, I think, 16 times, and 10 of us survived.
Where's your mom now?
Oh, she died back in 2002, and she's buried here in New York,
Yeah.
along with my father, who wanted actually to be buried next to his mother in the Philippines, but I was the executor and nixed that. So,
Well, why so? Why didn't you want to return his? Or
well, for one, it was too expensive for the family to afford,
yeah,
and we already had a place to bury him here in Long Island with my mother. So,
yeah.
you know,
Wow, this is some. So that's you with the tie next to your father on his to his left, correct?
I, yes, to his left.
Yeah, and then and the who is it's saying that's your mom, and that's 2, 4, 6, 8. There's like 10 of you, 10 kids.
Yes, 6 girls, 4 boys.
Oh my goodness! I mean,
Unfortunately, my brother Robbie, who's next to Joanne, in
yeah.
between Joanne and Alex, he died in 2009 from cancer.
Oh, sorry. And Joanne is down there at the bottom.
No, Joanne is next to my father, the one with the
Oh,
bouffant
Joanne, right,
hair.
with the hair. Hey, look, your father is proud, good Catholic family. Your mom said, I don't speak any Tagalog, and none of my kids do either. We're proud. Here's the thing: your story about your mom and about all the kids speaking English. Look, I grew up in San Francisco. My father came from Ilocos. My mother came from Manila, from Tondo. So she spoke Tagalog, but they did not speak to each other except using bad English. I mean, they didn't speak each other's dialect. So all I heard, people talk like this. I heard their accent. I heard the accent. I was good at picking up accents. And then we all had to learn English. I learned English by I listened to the radio. like for you or in New York. So I bet you listened to Cousin Brucey, right?
Oh yes, he was one of my favorites. Still is one of my favorites.
Cousin Brucey. Oh yeah, Cousin Brucey. Oh, I love.
He actually retired from Sirius
There,
satellite
oh, did he
radio
retire? I used to. Oh,
just a few months ago.
Cousin Brucey's top 40, top 100. Yeah, I love Cousin Brucey. Even though I was in California, we had our Cousin Bruceys, and we also had Ron Lundy and all those guys and Harry Harrison and
Yep.
William B. Williams, all the DJs. I knew about them because I would collect DJ pictures. I know that sounds weird, but I would collect DJ pictures from the Teen Beat magazines when they talked about your favorite DJs. And so, but that's how you learned English, right? You listen to them. You listen to Roger Grimsby on the
Well, no,
news.
it was with my friends that were in the neighborhood. I mean, there were tons of kids in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know, even though they were all white, you know, we when we hung out in the street, we
Yeah.
all talked English.
Yeah.
Even though when you went to the house, you everybody talked in whatever language their parents or grandparents were from.
Well, Joey,
So my parents pretty much spoke Visayan to each other, but when they spoke English, they sounded like, I guess, your parents.
yeah. Well, yeah, they actually they couldn't talk to each other, which is, I guess, maybe the reason why they had such a great marriage. I don't know, but no, I think the thing is that they communicated. But how did my question to you though is how did you get your Filipino on? How did you know you're Filipino?
Oh, I didn't until I was about 40. Okay, my
What,
my daughter
wait
was
a minute.
going to college.
Wait a minute. You didn't until you were 40?
Yep,
Oh,
my daughter was going to college, and she joined the Filipino American Student Association, Philippine United Student Organization, PUSO, in Stony Brook University.
yeah.
And so one of my job one of the tasks that I had on my job was the as one of the Asian American uh, um,
Right.
what do you call representative for the equal employment opportunity at work. So I was supposed to go around to all the different schools, and I mainly went to the colleges and talk to the students about all the federal job opportunities, the scholarships, the internships. And so I went to talk. My daughter invited me to the PUSO meeting, invited me to give my spiel on the federal government. So I went there and did my spiel, and there was dead silence at the end of the meeting.
Because they said, why is this?
And finally, one kid raises his hand, and he goes, how did you get along with your parents? And I said, well, really, my father, I didn't. And they were all having the same problem that I had growing up, with their parents, because of the culture clash. So in addition to the generational clash,
Yeah.
there was the culture clash, which I had with my father to the day that he died. And I'm sorry to say, we didn't never really, you know, uh, saw or made up, on anything, because he kept, trying to bring us up as if we were in the Philippines, pre-World War II. And I kept reminding him that we're in America, post World War II. And, never the twain will meet on how we looked at things.
God,
So,
Joey,
that's what woke me up to going, oh, there were people like me. And so I started hanging out with all the kids from all the college organizations. FIND is one of the national or regional groups here in the eastern states, Filipino Intercollegiate Networking Dialogue.
right.
And they were the ones that pointed me to FANHS. They
Wow.
said, you're a parent, so you really don't fit in with FIND. You need to hang out with people your age, because
Don't
here
hang
in
it.
New York, people my age, I had the same problem with them as I had with my parents. They
Yeah.
would say to me, oh, you're just like our kids. So,
Well, no, it's funny though, as you tell this story, and I think it's instructive when people who are listening who aren't related to Joey Tabaco, but people who are listening who are just saying, how does this happen? This Filipino assimilation or non-assimilation, right? Because what you say about how you get along with your parents, look, I had the same thing. I had the same problem, and it was worse for me because my father, being a 20s monong, wasn't able to have a family until the 50s, right? And so my father was 50 years older than me, which isn't as bad as, say, Mick Jagger's kid. His kid is like 76 years older than him. But, my father wasn't Mick Jagger. I mean, so how do you bridge that gap? And I think I know there are more than just a handful of us out there who listen to your story and say, "Hey, I know what that's like. I know what that's like to come to the end and not having made amends with my family or my father about these things." And maybe that's why I do my one man show on my father and about how he had this special place, right, in history, as being one of the first Filipinos to come in 1928. But how did you become a better Filipino working with fawns, or how did your kids notice a difference about?
Well, after I retired, after what do you call 36 years working for the federal government, at 55 you're eligible to retire after 30 years and 55. So the year I retired, I cold, you know, just went to a FANHS conference.
Yeah.
I didn't know anybody. And when I got to St. Louis there in 2004, I was welcomed as if I was a long lost
Joey Tabaco.
son.
No,
By
hey, look.
Fred,
Yeah.
Uncle Fred welcomed me, and Auntie Dorothy welcomed me, and I after before it was over, they told me my job was to go back to New York and revive the New York City chapter, which had uh, declined ever since Ray Alejandro had gotten sick and wasn't able to keep the chapter going by himself.
Yeah.
So I messed around there for like 5 years. In the meantime, I had found Kevin Nadal, who was actually the person that coalesced the rest of the people in there, because I was a lot older than most of the kids around back then. So again, they're looking at me like, you're one of the parents kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
and,
I know. I know.
and Kevin was like in between,
I know.
and was able to get, most of the younger people in who were active in the chapter and we're still going strong today.
Great. Yeah, guy, because look, I'm not a millennial, but I made a few. I know it's and I can relate. So,
Well, I've got grandkids that are millennials, and it's
oh, grandkids. Well, I guess at this point we should mention that it's National Grandparents Day coming up this weekend too. But something I don't want to mention because I'm not a grandparent yet, but you are. So, Joey, hats off to you there. My two bow off to you there. But well, that's something. So, 2004 in St. Louis, that was a good Fonz conference because it was all about St. Louis, the St. Louis World Fair. 16 years later, still going strong. How big is the chapter? How many Filipino families are you connected to? How I know you do things like you have that Filipinos in New York book, right? You put out.
yeah. Well, we're meeting, especially now with COVID going on. We're meeting on Zoom like at least once a month
Yeah.
and trying to put, especially now, something together for Philippine American History Month in October. So we're pretty active. We've already had several events starting in May with the Asian American Heritage Month. Uh, um, we've had several events online via Zoom. We call it the Merienda,
Marion.
where we gather Filipinos from not just New York but all over who make presentations, and we kind of keep it to an hour so people don't get too bored
Oh,
about what
nothing's
they're.
boring with you, Joey Tobacco. Joey, I say your name and tobacco. I just think that's like a cool name. Did people make jokes about tobacco and tobacco?
Yes, there's actually a city in I forget the province there. It's near Legazpi in the Philippines. That's named Tobacco. So, but my parents aren't from there.
Yeah. And he said, "Look, I don't know about North Carolina and Jesse Helms. I'm Filipino. I can't. But don't smoke. You don't smoke, do you?
I used to. I
Oh,
smoked for 50 years. I smoked, and then I got old. And my doctors and my wife and everybody said,
ah.
you need to stop smoking, otherwise you're going to die very soon.
But my name is Tobacco. I need my tobacco. Okay. No, it's good. It's good you quit. Now you should go vegan, and then you'll live forever. That's the
No,
truth. I'm telling you.
not ready for that yet. I get yelled at for eating too much red meat.
Yeah, forget the white meat too. The pork, the other white meat. You need to go vegan. To are you? How many are you on high blood pressure medicine?
Yeah, I'm on. I got all the old people diseases that,
I got none of them, and I don't even look like an old person. Uh, but yeah, look, but I'm telling you, vegan diet for all you Filipinos watching. Email me at filipinomuseum@gmail.com. I'll tell you how you can, transition. But I don't have any of the old people medications. Um, really, aspirin, not even aspirin. Anyway, so Joey, back to you, Joey. Yeah, you're a New Yorker. I can tell. You saw my Mets jersey here. I thought that maybe this would make you feel like, I'm like one of you. I got my Agbayan jersey, but you don't follow the Mets anymore, huh? You don't follow the Mets.
No, I've kind of gotten away from sports. Actually, my team was the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Ah, the Dodgers.
So, so when the Dodgers moved to LA, I kind of I tried to go with the with who's now the San Francisco Giants, but they moved out too. So I lost my interest in baseball.
The San Francisco Giants are still they were a good team. I mean, when they were in New York and then they moved to San Francisco, but they're still a good
Yes.
team. I mean, they're a bad team, but they're still kind of entertaining a little bit. Okay, look, I don't blame you. How about did the Islanders win last night?
Yes, they did.
Oh, so the
But
Islanders
I'm not a hockey fan. I've actually gotten away pretty much from a lot of the sports because
sports, it's just a waste
the
of time.
sports people are like crazy around here.
But those are the Queens folks. The Queens folks are they're all right. Here's the thing. How about
No,
the
especially out here for the Islanders in Suffolk County, the they're crazy about.
right? Well, because the Islanders are winners, and the Rangers. Where are the Rangers? I don't know where the Rangers are. Right.
Well, the
But
Rangers are in the city.
but I know, but I don't know where the Rangers are in terms of this playoff thing. If they're even any good.
No, I don't think they were in the
But
playoffs.
here's the thing: you're an Islander fan. You can say, "Oh, I like the hockey puck. I like the puck." Okay, so tell me, Joey. Uh, this whole thing about the Filipino community. This is a basic question. What are the Filipino newspapers in the area? Because I don't know if you know this, but I used to write my column. Emil Amok used to be in the Filipino Express in
I read
Jersey,
it.
and that's one section of the New York City area. But there, do the New Yorkers and the Jersey folks, do they connect or are they separate?
Well, the thing is, in Jersey, especially northern Jersey, and around like Newark, the there were so many Filipinos there, especially from, I guess you could call it the lower class,
Lower class,
that
Joey.
they became very tribal, and the
Yeah,
kids got together, formed gangs, and ended up fighting each other more than they were fighting the white or the black kids.
really.
So there were a lot of deaths and crimes that were reported back there in New Jersey where the Filipino Express went. New York wasn't as bad as that. Um, Here, most of the Filipino kids that were together were only divided into two different groups. One were the ones that were born and raised here that were Americans, basically. And then there were the ones that came over here, uh, you know, probably after or during high school and into their college years, where they became like a different social group, different clique. So there are two cliques that are basically here. And if you go to any of the colleges, you'll see that. There's the ones that came from the Philippines here
Mm,
mainly to get an education,
right.
and then there were the locals that are here that went to college mainly to party.
Yeah,
So
they're just here for the Olympia. I'm here for the and the Dineguan. Yeah. No, I know. I was Olympia Filipino too. And, full of myself, yeah, Filipino. No, my mom, she was the one who really brought the culture to me. But back to the newspapers. So, did you read Filipino newspapers? Did you get the news from the Philippines, or did you care? Did you read?
Once I joined NAFA back in the 90s, that's
Oh,
the first adult group that I hooked up with. I started reading the Filipino periodicals that were in the New York area. And there are several, you know. And like I say, many of them are oriented as to what's going on in the Philippines. And then, they'll show some of the things that are happening here in New York in particular. But most of it is, again, directed to what's happening in the Philippines, because most of the Filipinos my age uh, are still very much oriented towards the old country.
yeah.
So,
And there's
so
there's a lot of migration that's taken place post 65, right? So whether it's
yes,
60s or 2000s or 2010s now, you've got new people, new professionals coming in, and they have a different orientation. They might look at politics and see Trump and everything that's happening in Washington, U.S. national politics, but they have one eye on the Philippines still.
yes.
And how do you deal with that there in New York, or what is the schism like in New York?
Well, for me personally, I ignored Duterte because I've been told to calm down in my rhetoric about
You don't have to
about
come
the
down here.
politics in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And if you look at my Facebook page, you see I'm pretty vocal about the politics here in the U.S.
Right.
And I consider what's going on in the Philippines worse than what's going on here in the U.S. So I was told, mainly for the benefit of my relatives there in the Philippines,
Yeah.
since thanks to Facebook, I'm in contact with them again, on almost a day-to-day basis in some cases.
Yeah.
Uh, I have my views and I'm going to express them, until, something forces me, to stop saying what I think.
Yeah.
And so the problem is when I get with Filipinos my age,
Right.
most of them are, they like Duterte. I don't know what it is with Filipinos and dictators, but, my father and I, one of the big things we argued about all the time was Marcos.
Right.
My father loved Marcus,
Right.
and I told him what I thought about Marcus,
You
and
even,
he
you
was.
even call Marcos like he's like a Jewish guy, Marcus. Marcos, Marcos, not like Neiman Marcus. Come on, Marcos. Like we
That's
share.
how my father pronounced it.
Well, we share that too because my father came from Marcus.
So,
He came from
so
Marcusville,
you know,
Ilocos Norte, from Lawag City. So sitting
until
and
until I joined FANHS, I didn't understand why Filipinos liked him,
yeah,
and especially my father.
yeah,
And FANHS pretty much taught me that that the reason my father and Filipinos like him, his age and my age now, like Marcus, is because they gave Filipinos pride in their country because of all the things that he did, not counting how he did it. But
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean the details. Yeah, a lot of people left the Philippines because of martial law. And if you go back to some of the other Filipino pop ups we did, virtual museum pop ups we did, where we talk to Professor Daniel Phil Gonzalez, we talk about the waves of immigration and how the Marcos anti Marcos thing divided our community, and how today, Duterte, non Duterte, press freedoms, non press freedoms in the Philippines has kind of become big issues within the community. But you kind of avoid that. You kind of focus here on the American Filipino community and history, or what are
well,
your
that's why I like FANHS.
Yeah.
we're looking at not only the past way, in the past history, but
Yeah.
we look at what's going on now. Like one of the projects we have here is trying to get Little Manila
Right.
named, putting up a street sign on Roosevelt Avenue in Woodside in Queens, because that's where the concentration of Filipino businesses, mainly restaurants and some retail stores, sorry stores that are there in that area. And it's been like that ever since I'd say probably the 70s is when it started,
Yeah.
where the cluster, because before that, Filipinos would just spread out all over the place, and they
Yeah.
started clustering there mainly for the stores and stuff. And so we're trying to get that named as Little Manila here in New York
Little,
officially.
Little Manila. And where would you put it again? You put it what
It's
part?
in Woodside, Queens.
Queen.
I'm
Well, Queens
six.
is the place, right? Queens is the place where all the Filipinos go.
Well,
It's what I hear.
Queens is a place where everybody goes.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's the most diverse county in America, more diverse than any other place. Everybody from all over the world ends up in Queens to start off with.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much where I consider to be my hometown is Queens, New York.
Yeah. I do hope that you get that and let us know what we can do to make to make that happen, at the museum because one of the things that people wonder is like what happens. I mean, right now, the most successful of the Asian communities, right, the Chinatowns of our country, they're under attack or they're not from any. I mean, their villain is the real estate developer who comes in and wants to gentrify and kick out and change the makeup of a community that has been built for generations, but that's very valuable land, right? And so, what's happening with the Chinatowns? It's hard to establish Filipino towns or Manila towns unless you recognize it right now and say, hey, we're going to call it this, and this is we're going to preserve it now while it's happening. The history of the present is good, and then we'll see how far we go with this, in the future. But that's a big thing. I heard about the Queens markets and where all the Filipinos hang out from nurses. And nurses, are they a big part of your community? I know that the deaths of nurses on the front line that kind
Well,
of brought
but
people.
that's not just in Queens. That's all over. Our hospitals here in the Metro New York. Well, it's not just even Metro New York. Hospitals all over
Yeah.
have a significant percentage of nurses and other medical personnel, doctors and technicians are
Right.
Filipinos,
Right.
because they like to get into that field because that's what their parents, told them they had to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer,
Right.
or nurse if you're a woman.
Well, didn't your father say you needed to be Carlos Romula?
My father had dreams of me becoming a UN diplomat, but that wasn't going to go anywhere with
Look,
me.
I hung out in Queens too long. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm a greaser. I'm right. I'm Fonz. I'm the Fonz. I'm not the Fonz. I'm the Fonz. I'm not.
Yes, that funds.
Yeah. I'm not going to do
Hey.
diplomatic work. Yeah. Hey, that's good there. Hey. So, all right. So, tell me about the nurses. Tell me. I mean, the nurses are a big.
There's been a significant number of Filipinos, not just nurses, but other, like technicians and doctors and stuff like that, who have died, from COVID-19 exposure. Many of them now who work well, not so much now, but earlier when we had the problem, and probably later on this winter when the flu season hits again, they couldn't even go home. They were living in their cars or in apartments near the hospital, or even in housing that the hospital provided, uh, to take care of the patients that they had in all those places. The center of that was Elmhurst Hospital in Queens again, which is right near Woodside. And there were so many, people there. The FANHS New York chapter got together with some of the other organizations to help feed those medical personnel that were on the front line of trying to take care of all the COVID-19 patients that they had.
Yeah,
So,
and people should go to my column that I wrote for the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog at ALDEF, aaldef.org/blog, and look up, do the search for Jem Scorp, GEMSCORP. He's a nurse at Elmhurst Hospital, and
mhm.
I interviewed him, and this is a harrowing story about Filipinos during COVID. It's a part of our history because when we look back to this period, say a year, 5 years, 10 years, and we say, well, what were the Filipinos doing during the COVID crisis? And you'll look back to people like Jim Scorp and say they were living and trying to not die as they went on the front lines trying to save lives. And that,
But even before the COVID crisis hit, there were so many Filipinos that were in the medical field.
oh, yeah,
You know, like my kid's pediatrician, she was Filipino. You
yeah.
know,
Yeah. Oh,
you
yeah.
know.
There are always people in the medical field, but when we look back and see what were Filipinos doing, we'll see that large number emerge as, oh, they were on the front lines. They weren't just quarantined at home, hanging out, trying to figure out how to work Zoom and try
They
to
were actually quarantined at work.
yeah their work, or they were dying from yeah. It's an interesting story because as the information flow was slow to come out, nurses knew what was really happening. And to the degree that nurses were willing to share information to media people, we were able to get a glimpse of just what was happening and the danger involved. And this was, I talked to Jem at the time. He was a male nurse. I talked to him at the time of the height, the first spike in New York when Elmhurst really was ground zero of the crisis. It's gotten a little better in New York, but who knows? And we're coming to Labor Day, and if everyone's good, maybe we won't have another spike. But now, how are you hanging out there, Joey? Being in your 70s, and we're all kind
Well,
of
my wife works for St. Francis Hospital in Nassau County, so she's actually part of the COVID team, even though she's not treating actual COVID patients unless they happen to have cancer and are getting radiation treatment also, since she works in that section. So she's pretty much kept me at home and told me that I can't go out. And the only time I get out is when I go to see my doctors for all my old age diseases that I have, or the few days that I still work maybe uh, 2, 3, 4 days a month. So,
yeah. Hey,
I kind of look forward to that now because it's a way to get out of the house.
yeah, don't tell your wife that. Hey, Joey, I'm looking at our Facebook page, and if anyone who's watching has a question, enter into our Facebook page. And I see that some people, there are a lot of tobaccos out there, which is good. That's why it's a good thing to if you got have it if you have a guest, it's a good thing to have a guest who has grew up with a family of 10 children, because that'll assure that you'll have at least all the primary relatives involved. But, but some people, Jonathan, I guess, is Jonathan your brother?
My son.
Oh, he said we used to go to all the Filipino parades in New York every year.
Yep.
What were the Filipino parades, and when were they?
Well, the Filipino Independence Day parades, run by the Filipino Independence Day Committee in New York, and that's sort of like guided by the consulate, since we have a major consulate here. Plus, the UN mission is also here in New York, so they pretty much help organize a pretty fantastic Filipino Independence Day parade, to the point where it gets so big and crowded that lately, especially as I've gotten older, I really don't go anymore because it's just too cram packed with activities and things that are going on. Plus, it's become very expensive. They've started, like, the food is, gone up. You could buy stuff. I mean, I live out here in Nassau County, in Suffolk County. We actually have 2 Filipino restaurants here in Ronkonkoma. You know, that was unheard of when I moved out here. People didn't even know that Filipino food existed.
God, if
So,
you're around Kankama Filipino, you can get all the lumpia you want 24
yep.
in wrong. Yeah, around
You
Kankama.
know,
Uh,
the Filipino restaurant business has really, shot up here in the metropolitan area. And so if you go to some place like the Filipino Independence Day, the vendors that are there, you're going to pay more for the Filipino food there than you would, if you went to your local restaurant.
okay, so tell me, what's the best Filipino restaurant? I went to the famous one out in Brooklyn. Purple.
Oh, the purple yam. The purple yam is good food, but it's fusion. It's not real Filipino food.
Fusion. It's fusion. It's not real Filipino food.
if
What
you want if you
Joy?
want real Filipino food in quantities that you actually can bring something home, you go to Ihawan. They're in Little Manila in Woodside, Queens.
I want my pancit and I want a
Yes.
bucket. You don't say bucket. They give me bucket of pancit. I want a whole bucket, please. A whole one. Don't give me half bucket. What? Bucket. Bucket. I want a bucket of my pancit. Okay. All right. So
that so
uh,
that's the place. Most of the places there in Little Manila, uh, some of them are fusion, but a lot of them are still, what do you call real kind of Filipino food, to the point where some of them still are like the Toro kind of places where you point.
the
What,
point.
yes.
I want
What,
that.
yes.
I want that. Is that a gong? I want.
Ihawan, at least you can order stuff there and they bring it out to you. And like I say, the prices are good. The quantities are more than adequate.
They
And,
even have chairs. You don't have to squat.
and if you want to eat with your hands, you can buy those, what do you call, dishes there that they I forgot the name of what you call
Maya,
those.
Maya,
Kamayan, yes.
Dina, yeah. Oh,
I mean, they will give you some
you are born.
forks and spoons, but if you want to eat with your hands, go ahead.
Not the left hand, right? Right. I know. There's a one hand you're supposed to use, the left side. The right. You would know if you're cool.
my parents, especially my mother, she ate with her hands.
I will say this. I don't often admit to this, but yes, um, we ate with our hands occasionally. I guess when my mom was feeling really Filipino, and when the fish was raw, when we ate, kilawin, and the fish was raw, and we ate with our hands. That was oh, we're Filipino now. Okay, but I never, my father was a cook, and so he would bring in food from the white restaurants to sort of introduce white food to us. Oh, this is oysters Rockefeller. Oh, the white people, they eat this up. Oh, is this oyster?
when I went into the Air Force,
Yeah.
I was not allowed to eat with a fork and spoon. I had to learn to eat with a knife and a fork.
Oh, it's fork and spoon. That's right. Because we just shovel. We shovel our mouth.
So now I eat with a knife and a fork.
Oh, that's very, very refined, Joey. We have another message here. Um, let's see. Oh, we have a lot of people say, "Go Queens! Yay, Queens!"
Yes.
So,
Queens is the Filipino place here in Metro New York area.
and
Although Jersey City in Jersey is also, a little Manila of its own.
yeah. Well, where is Ihawan? Where is
Ihawan. Ihawan is
Ihawan?
barbecue in Tagalog.
Oh, they put the meat on the little stick. Little stick.
Yes, that they have good barbecue there, but they have all the other dishes, are very good.
All right. What does a vegan like me, Joey? Come on, give me some.
Well, you can have that thing that Uncle Fred always used to push.
What
I
is that?
forgot the name of the Filipino dish that's pretty much all vegetable.
Pinakbet? I don't know.
Pinakbet.
Pinak.
Pinakbet.
hold the bagong. Pinakbet.
Well, I can't eat bagong anymore.
I know. I'll
Wait,
fix, I got a fix for the diet. If you're a high blood pressure
yeah.
Filipino, if you're a high blood pressure Filipino,
And I love bagong.
yep, at gmail.com. I'll give I'm a certified vegan, whole food, plant based Filipino. So, Joey, look, I've enjoyed talking to you, and the people who are with us on Facebook still have enjoyed talking, have enjoyed hearing us. But now, what is the future of Filipino Americans? What are they into now? What do you see will happen in the next generation? Are we more?
And unless we, not just the parents, but all the Filipinos get together and to through you know groups like FANHS try to teach the history of Filipinos in America, we're going to lose it to the usual Irish and Polish and Italian, and they have brick and mortar places where they go to celebrate. It's very rare to find a Filipino American center here in the US. In fact, in New York, the only Filipino American center there is the one at the consulate. So it's
Right.
more
Well,
like a Filipino center.
right. Well, I was
Yeah.
going to say, if you want a center, God, you got to go to Fifth Avenue. They go to a
And now with COVID, since they can't do all the activities that they used to do before there, the funding is like falling way off for a lot of these centers, that places that do have centers are having trouble maintaining them because the money's not coming in anymore.
well,
So,
yeah, that's why we have
so
this virtual pop up because the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum in Stockton is our place. And when I took over as museum director, my hope was to we'll have little programs like this once or twice a month. But now we're shut down. We can't even have our programs once a month. So every
mhm.
Saturday and Sunday at noon, we have these pop ups, and it's a way to get people not just who can drive to Stockton. Although Joey, I fully expect that you can drive to Stockton in your lifetime. I mean, it's only like a 5 day drive. You could stop along the way, take it to Stockton, and then you can go down to Delano and see where Larry Itliong started the grapes, and then drive to San Francisco and see the Giants who you would have loved if you still loved baseball. But look, I think this opportunity to talk to you and to be here virtually is a godsend because we can let people know that we're a broad Filipino community. We're everywhere. We're in Queens. We're on Long Island. We're in we're in Hampton Roads. We're in Chicago. We're in Texas. We're in California. We're in Seattle. We're everywhere. We're everywhere. People know what Olympia is, right? And look, do people stop you, Joey, and say, "Oh, you look funny for a Chinese guy," or they say, have you gotten
They've
attacked?
been doing that since I was in kindergarten.
Have they attacked you? Have you heard about
No,
people?
I haven't personally been attacked, but there are Filipinos here, especially since COVID, that have taken the heat for being Asian looking, Chinese looking, because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in California, in the middle of California, where there are so many Hispanics or Latinx, right? And so I get mistaken. I don't think I ever get mistaken for Latinx, but you get a name like Guillermo, right? That only adds to it, right? I say no, that was only for tax purposes. I'm Lamak. That's a Filipino. Guillermo, that's that was a colonized name, our slave name. So, Joey, really, I hear you about having a center. I want to see you have something there in Queens. I want to see you bring all the Filipinos from. They're mostly professionals now, right? If you're in New York, you're
No,
there.
that we have the whole spectrum of society.
Yeah.
We have everything from professionals all the way down to just common folk.
Common
And
folk.
I'm more of a common folk kind of person, even though I have sort of like a professional job.
Joey
You know,
Tabaco, you're my
I'm
kind of common folk. My kind.
I'm I'm a weatherman.
You're my kind of common folk, Joey Tabaco. You know, my dad was he was a cook, right? He just a short order cook, not a chef, just a cook guy with an apron. And so I relate to what you're saying there, Joey. And how about your kids? Are they as Filipino as you are now? Or are you more Filipino than them?
Well, I've tried to bring them to all these Filipino functions. Like I said, my son said we used to go to the Filipino Independence Day parades.
Yeah.
I brought my grandkids to the FANHS conferences that I've been able to get to. Um, a lot of the reason why I do this is because of my kids and grandkids.
Yeah.
Because if we parents and grandparents don't pass this stuff on to our kids, um, we're going to lose them. They're going to become totally Americanized and won't know where they came from. And if anything, they'll be looking at their Irish, Italian, Polish, whatever English side of because like my grandkids are all, they're only one quarter Filipino now.
Right.
So,
The great, it's a great American mix, right? And
yep.
I say also that my kids are they're half Filipino. My kids are all and so I always said that when that was going to happen, when the multi-race, multicultural group grows, that maybe we will be done with the kind of race divide or race division that we see, because we'll all have a not just a blood interest, but because of the blood interest, obviously we have a love interest in all of us. And that I said that maybe 30 years ago, and we're still have these struggles. And so hopefully the our the next generation will have uh, a new and better way to go forward and to bring us all together. But it
We
begins
have the virtual pop up.
we have and it begins with history, right? It begins with knowing that these are our stories. So Joey Tabaco, look, I appreciate you coming on. Tell your friends, share this if you're watching live. Thank you very much for all your comments on the Facebook chat box. If you missed any or all of this, you can catch it when in a few minutes. Facebook recycles this and puts it up on our page. You can go to a page that has all our recordings and see all the recordings we've done. And if you say, "Hey, I don't like to look at my small screen," you can put this on Facebook Watch on your smart TV. I know you have smart TVs. You put it on your because all Filipinos have a big TV, right? The Filipinos love the.
My suggestion is you get a YouTube page.
Are you? Oh yeah, we can get a YouTube page, but we like the Facebook. We like the Facebook. And,
Not everybody is on Facebook.
oh, not everyone's on Facebook. Okay, look, that's true. We'll get it. We have a YouTube page, and we're going to put it there. But one step at a time, Joey. One step at a. So it's hard to be an Agbayani. It's hard to be a hero, but we are going to try to be heroes. All of us going forward. Joey, really, thank you. Stay
Thank you for the opportunity.
stay in touch. And thank you in Facebook land. Remember, watch us. We pop up Saturday and Sunday, noon Pacific. We don't always go this long because we don't always have such a garrulous host or guest. Joey Tabaco, who laughs at all my old man jokes, all my dad jokes he laughs at. So, Joey, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great Labor Day. Don't forget the Grape Strike 55th anniversary on the 8th. Go and watch our interview on our Facebook Live page with Alex Idalor. You'll learn a lot about Larry Itliong in the Grape Strike. Okay, Alex, take care. Take care, everyone out there in Facebook land. I'm Emil Guillermo. This is the Filipino American National Historical Society pop up. If you feel like donating, we're a legit 501c3. Go to our Facebook page. There's ways so you can make sure you can support us. Thank you again. Take care.